Hey guys, everybody, welcome to episode 12 of Biomassed. Another great show for you tonight, and we've got a pretty good cast of visitors here. A couple of folks that haven't been on the show in a while, so should be a good discussion. A little bit of a lull tonight in terms of what's going on in Dust, but we are kind of coming towards the finish line for the CPM elections, which is kind of a neat thing. I think a lot of guys and candidates in the community will be sort of fond of not hearing anything more about CPM elections and actually just seeing what happens after the elections when folks are named and how CCP and the CPM team moves forward from there. So with that, we're just going to dive right into the intros, and we'll start with Cross, whose
Who
mic
really needs to learn to work the mute function.
It's okay. It's a button. Small, square. It's probably on your keyboard. No problem.
Yep. Cross Atu, member of OSG, supporter of Pokey's imminent regime of tax hikes, and all-around forum rat.
Awesome. Okay. Yes, Pokey is a communist. Srizel.
Yeah, I'm Sirzel. I'm one of the alliance leaders of Top Men, and I am also a member of the Bastion and EVE Online. I'm a co-host here on Biomassed, and I am running for CPM 1.
Awesome. Iron Wolf.
Hello, this is Wolf Saber, and I might be becoming a ex-CPM member in a few weeks.
Okay, that's an interesting take on it, but all right. And Derry?
Hey guys, Derry, Director for OSG and Tech Support here for Biomass.
Good deal. And Pokey?
I'm Pokey Draven. I'm CEO of OSG Planetary Operations and the official communist for Biomassed.
Awesome. His favorite color is pink. SirManBoy.
SirManBoy here, Director of Mullen Labe, CPM1 candidate, and second-time guest on Biomass. Glad to be here again. Thanks, Jason. And Sarai.
Awesome. And Pokey. And Black Jackal.
I'm Black Jackal, member and former CEO, founder of Southern Legion, CPM1 candidate for at least the next couple of days, I suppose. And yeah.
Okay, awesome. So we'll kind of dive right in, guys. We have a little bit of a condensed show for you tonight. We have a lot of folks that have, some different real life things going on. But that's how it kind of goes when you're playing around in a video game hobby. But with that, we have a couple of things going on in Dust. I know we just talked about the the CPM elections kind of coming closed, and we were firing that around a little bit prior to the episode. And really, it comes down to, and I think it was Sarai that said it. If you were going to vote, you've probably already done it. If you want to get one of your mates on to vote, or you want to get your last alt in, I think the only thing anybody in the community, whether you're hoping to be elected, hoping to not get somebody elected, or whatever, it's really just participate. So if you haven't got your vote on for whatever reason, I think that's the only thing we could tell you. And barring that, I suspect maybe in about a week and a half, we might know who the new CPM1 candidate, or really CPM1 elect is. With that, what we'd like to kind of open up the discussion tonight on is a little bit of the development of the discussion about Hotfix Charlie. There's been a few things that's kicked around, and then we'll ask another couple open questions, but it's pretty open tonight, so you can hit us up on the Biomass channel in-game, or for those of you that are on Skype, we're in the Biomass channel, and we're also monitoring some of the different Dust channels. And you can always hit us up on Twitter. So I've already posted up a note in Twitter that we are live. So any one of those means, feel free to join the discussion that way. So with that, I'll just kind of open the floor up to everybody. We've had a few developments with Hotfix Charlie. It looks like the big thing that they wanted to do, which was really take a hard look at optimizing the assault suits, they're still going to kind of go through with. There's some conflicting interest about what they've at least announced in the forums about what they want to do, which we can talk about. And then the other thing that we've noticed is that writ large across all suits, what they're looking at is probably not touching them. And by that, I mean they want to move the bulk of the suit rebalance discussion in terms of slots and equipment layouts and things like that over to perhaps Hotfix Delta. And I think Rattati may be onto something here, just based on the raw amount of feedback he got and how conflicting some of it was. When you have an engaged community, that's going to happen. There's very few times you're going to have big slam dunks that the devs can just pile on. Or even if everybody agrees that something needs to be fixed, how you go about doing it, there's a ton of different ways. And we've got a bunch of guys in channel that probably all have like 1.5 different ways to do that. So with that, I'll just kind of open up the table and ask you guys, what did you think about some of the recent discussions about Hotfix Charlie and suit balancing?
I can jump in for a second. A couple things that worry me, and anything that they talk about with respect to changing Logis always sort of gets my attention because, I have every Logi suit protoed out, and two things for sure that kind of bothered me, and I understand that they're interested in balance, but these ideas sort of came out of left field a little bit for me because they didn't seem like things that the community was really asking for. Was the change to the Amar Logi suit, how they were talking about taking away the sidearm. That's a component of that suit that I think gives it a lot of character, and a lot of people who went to that Logi suit did so because of that bonus to it, and they skilled into a sidearm largely because it had that characteristic. So I think it's sad to see that go, for one. And then what they're doing to the Cal Logi, I think, makes a suit that is already screaming for help even worse, because it's a 5-4, 5 highs, 4 lows suit. And most people who use that suit, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but I tend to think so because I've played with a lot of different fitting ideas for that suit. It takes at least one of those lows, the use of a CPU module. So you're already it's already kind of a 5-3 suit because you need the CPU module.
Yep,
and if you're going to, and if it's going to now actually become a 5-3 suit, it's going to feel more like a 5-2 suit. So, you can add the extra equipment slot to that suit, but I don't know how much you're really going to get out of it, given how, strapped for CPU you're going to be with an extra equipment slot and one less low slot. So those are two things that jumped out at me on the Logi side of things that I was concerned about. So yeah, that's one thing for me right there. That's a concern. How about the rest of you guys? Or Jason, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I'm just opening it up. By the way, yeah, I do honestly. I hear a lot of what you're saying about the Cal Logi. I run that suit quite a bit. The one thing I would say is it was not entirely clear if they were swapping an equipment slot, leaving it at 3 at the proto level for equipment, and giving you a sidearm, or they were just pulling a low slot and giving you a sidearm. The one thing I would tell you, I think Cross and Pokey have talked about this before. When you have your suit bonus tied to those equipment slots, the reduction, that's awesome. But then when you add a module or something else that doesn't get that bonus, I think you're right. What it's really going to end up doing is giving you almost like a secondary nerf to particularly the CPU for the Cal Logi, which a lot of folks may or may not remember. They actually nerfed the resources, the CPU PG on it, almost a year ago, I think, when they were kind of the Slayer Logi of choice. So I was pretty concerned about that. And I think a lot of it came from a discussion about are the Amar and Cal Logis quote unquote passive Logis, because their racial bonuses are tied around just dropping a single piece of equipment on the ground and continuing to move. Whereas the Gal Logi and the Amar Logi, you actually had to have the piece of equipment up and being used for their bonus to be active. What do you guys think?
Well, it goes with another issue of how many slots a bonus can cover. For example, the MR Logi, the most I can see it's usually 2. I don't know many MR Logis that would do all 3, but then again, I don't run a whole lot of squads. Whereas the Caldari Logi can at least use all its equipment slots and get bonuses for every single one of them, because there are times where there's not enough hives.
Yeah, that's like a one-off suit that just dropping hives. It's too much of a one-trick pony, I think. I see your point, but it's the same thing for the Amar. When you tie it like that, it's pretty tough. Whereas like the Mimitar Logi, just because it's got four slots and then it's got a bonus to probably the most critical Logi tool in the game, i.e. the Repper. That's where a lot of the imbalance comes, particularly at the PC level.
Well, and a bonus that isn't broken also.
Yeah, that's
you have to compare it to other classes too. There are classes out there that have bonuses to almost every single one of its slots. The Sentinel, for example, the only one it doesn't have a bonus for is the grenade slot.
Yeah, a lot of the current balance stuff, the thing that kind of makes me flinch is the lack of definition of where the balance is happening and how. For example, The assaults clearly need some love to be more properly viable, but balancing the assaults without looking first at what one needs to do to balance the medium frames in general, of which the assaults are a specialization, really makes me wince. Because you have things like the medium frames having comparatively problematic EHP right now for their roles. Both the Logi and the assault have this issue. And then you're balancing within the specialization to address a frame-wide issue, which is only going to cause more endemic balance problems down the road.
Yeah, I mean, you've got the assault and the Logi are probably some of the most similar suits in the game. I mean, you've got the Commando and the Sentinel, but they're kind of strange offshoots of each other. So it's a bit of a special situation to look at the medium frames, and I think we're moving too far away of thinking of them as completely separate, opposed to variants of the same frame. And I think that that those differences need to come in the equipment and the bonuses and the weapons. I mean, those are kind of their niche roles there. But that being said, the overall performance of the suit itself needs to be similar. I mean, with some differences, obviously, but I think buffing the assault and not really looking at the Logi and seeing how that's going to survive in a firefight is not good. You need to kind of look at both at the same time, because they are both medium frames. And so, I mean, having that medium frame mentality on how does the suit perform, specialization aside, is really key. And I think it's an issue that a lot of people aren't really looking at. I mean, Cross and I have talked about this before, and I've been convinced it's actually quite critical. And I do hope that once we get the assaults more up to speed, at least at this most recent increase to the HP and the resources, that we actually take a really strong look at the Logis and their slot layouts and see how that's going to actually compare and perform against the assault, to avoid the Slayer Logi, but also make them actually viable in a firefight, not necessarily as a direct direct combat role, but survivable so they can actually do their job, because the dead Logi is useless.
Well, it goes back to my usual thinking that almost every single game that I know of feels like it's been balanced around its basic DPS class, which will be, in our case, the Assault.
Yeah, I could
I
kind of see
there
that.
at the moment.
Yeah, I was about to say, I think
the DPS class at the moment is the Commando, and the probably more the Sentinel with the HMG as well. That's a close range DPS sort of weapon. The Assault doesn't compare to either of those.
Well, it should be the Assault because the other two are supposed to be support type classes.
It should be. I completely agree. But unfortunately, at this point in time, I believe the Commando is more about our more to medium level DPS sort of suit at this point in time. It's a heavy suit spin-off, but it's more akin to the Assault suit than it is to the actual heavy Sentinel suit.
Well, that's probably why they're changing it for Legion like that.
Yeah, that might very well be. I did want to throw out a kind of an interesting question. This is something I've batted around with some folks earlier today. I was kind of catching up on a lot of the discussion about the slot layouts. And by the way, I think, if nobody's said it yet, I think there's a move afoot really to punt a lot of this to Delta, just because of the need for additional feedback and really probably some refinement, from the player community and from the dev side on kind of how they want to approach this. But one of the things that struck me in a lot of the discussion that nobody was really talking about was when you start balancing slots, like and most people think of that as purely the highs and the lows, right? There is always going to be a winner and loser, mostly centered around the equipment, because what they're really balancing, it's the slots, but what they're ultimately really trying to balance, I think, is the tank. They're really trying to get to how you deliver HP and regen, and then to a secondary level, particularly with the scouts, because of how predominant E-War can be if you've got a scout tuned correctly or incorrectly, the E-War. And it strikes me that any of the other modules could either suffer greatly or create a huge imbalance. And I'll use an example here. And so just let me frame this. The proposal that I was throwing out to a couple of guys earlier is, what if you take some of the existing module slots that are either a high or low, and then you turn them into equipment, but then you increase the number of equipment writ large across all the suit bases. So for example, the damage modifier, the damage module, that is always going to be a point of contention for somebody. The reason that the Gaudi's were flavor of the month is because it could go full tank and stack DPS upgrades. And if you move that to like a low slot, you're just going to have the other way around. So why not move that to an equipment slot where it's somewhat neutral. You could make a decent case that the code breakers are kind of the same. You could make a case that perhaps biotics are the same, or at a minimum, maybe break the biotics up where they're fitting, perhaps the cardiac regulators in the lows and the KinCats in the highs, or some variation on the theme. I'm curious to hear what you guys think about that. Is not just the slot balancing, but perhaps looking at how we tag some of the different pieces of equipment and how that might affect the slot balance and really, the actual in-game play.
What I personally would feel from what you were explaining just then would be Logis get more equipment than assaults, and if you give things like damage mods into the equipment slots, fair enough, they're giving up functionality of the Logi, but they're gaining functionality of this Slayer.
No, yeah, I actually thought about that, and I think what you could do is you could overcome that with either a pretty severe stacking bonus, or just like with the cloak, you can actually not give the Logi bonus to that module. Now they could always fit one, sure, but at some point it's going to be, you basically make it too expensive or not worth your time fitting more than one.
Yeah, another thing you can look. Go ahead.
Well, that goes with the other problem is that when you give players the option to increase their HP, they are very prone to pick that above any other utility module you can fit in either highs or lows, so that causes a problem on its own.
Yeah, I mean, one thing you can look at also is potentially having a damage mod for a high slot and the damage mod for a low slot. And you could maybe get a little fancy with it and have it be for certain damage types to kind of encourage that, okay, so if it's a high slot damage mod, it would give bonus to hybrid blaster. So that would be beneficial to a Galente suit that's using the lows for its armor and HP, and then it can use the highs for that specific damage type. And then vice versa for something like a Kaldari would have the hybrid rail and a low slot damage mod. And kind of encourage, again, that racial pairing of suit and weapon.
I had a similar sort of outlook in making, like, obviously, say keeping damage mods at your mid slots or high slots, whatever you call them, but then making what we consider a low power secondary variant for the other slots, so low slots in this particular case. You have your more powerful ones in the mid slots, and they'd have a penalty or some sort of activation requirement or something like that. Then you have the low slots, which are sort of passive, similar to what Eve does with a lot of their things. They've got tracking computers in the mid slots. But you have to activate them. They use capacitor or stamina or whatever resource you want to use. But then you have in the low slots, you have tracking enhancers, which are passive. They're less effective, like far less effective, about a third effective as the top ones. But something along those lines. So that way you've got the diversity of fitting as well to balance out that way. So you can fit for damage and shield tank, but you can't fit for as much damage as you could if you fit for armor tank and damage. Something along those lines.
I will have to agree that module variety is very poor in Dust 514, and I hope it gets fixed in Legion. But our options in Dust right now are pretty limited, and it would help if we can further expand them to allow further customization and playstyles.
I can say that one thing they did that exacerbates that problem is, and a lot of people disagree with me, I had a Scout cloak dampening proposal that was out there for a while. Some people liked it on the forums. Some people didn't like it at all, but it gave Logis the ability to play a little bit of E-War, which was nice. It wasn't the proposal wasn't done in such a way that it made them compete equally with the Scouts, but it gave them a chance if they really stacked those E-War modules. Essentially, the idea was if you were a Logi that had a 2 module advantage over a Scout, then you beat that Scout because you had that many more modules than them. That's what it breaks down to. I could show you guys the proposal later. But if you had Logis that had the ability to do that, that would certainly introduce some variety, because now that I know that I can't play any E-War with Scouts at all without a scanner, I choose to put nothing but, shield and armor plates on, because really that's the only thing that's going to benefit me out there. But had I been able to play some E-War, I think that would have provided some variety and allowed people to do some different things out there. And of course, it would have taken some of the tank out of the game, which I think some people do want. But really, since I can't, I won't. And the protection is something that I need. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, you make a really good point there. Is like the Logi suit has always, you could really tweak that to some very specialist things, mostly because the slot layouts and the CPU PG afforded you. One of the things a lot of what I hear is actually starting to lend more credence to CCP Rattati's thought about basically a standardized CPU PG and slot layout for medium frames in general, or really frame suits in general, no matter what weight class. And then you tweak the bonuses pretty heavily to sort of incentivize certain play styles. I think that's a good thing, but it can very easily be carried too far where you can really curb sort of, meta breaking gameplay and things like that with some creativity. That's something I think they really should kind of keep their eye on, is not going overboard. I'm all about optimizing a suit for a role, something of that nature, but you really got to kind of be careful of going a little too overboard with it, where you might really shoehorn people into certain styles of play.
Yeah, the initial proposal is actually something that Kagoshi put together. Well, he posted the thread as he usually does and managed to stir up a very interesting discussion. And at least for the medium frames, it seems pretty valid. But one of the elements that's kind of been overlooked in a lot of the discussion of it that I've seen is the basic suit stats, because it's all well and good to say we're normalizing fittings across the board and we're going to tool the racial and role bonuses accordingly after that. But if you don't also do something about the base stats on suits, you're going to run into some pretty inherent imbalances, since they're already established for a different modality.
No, I think you're spot on with that. And the unfortunate thing is, like, in this, what I've also noticed is that there's a big explosion of discussion from the Logi community, and let's not lose sight. The original intent for Hotfix Charlie was really to give some more assault love, but I think what you saw was a sort of groundswell of, well, if you're doing that, you really are going to need to touch more than one suit at a time. Otherwise, you could go down an ugly road with some things. I did notice in the what it looks like they're going to retain for Hotfix Charlie for the assault class was some sort of like a raw HP buff. So it sounds like an actual stat buff on the suits itself. And a few other minor tweaks. I'm not tracking anything major. It certainly didn't look to be a straight DPS buff, unless anybody's seen anything else like that.
I still really just wince over the idea of trying to make the assault more viable by going with HP first. It seems conceptually to be deeply flawed. You're always going to eclipse one thing, and yeah.
Well, if you look at Eve, you look at almost any ship in Eve, almost every single one of those ships are capable of some form of V-War, and it is highly valued, more so than tanking.
True, but you can't actually shut someone's DPS down like you can in Eve.
Well, that's the unfortunate thing you can't do in Dust, is doing that.
Yeah, well, and also the context at the moment is the raw onboard stats. We're not talking about the assaults getting a buff to, say, shield regulators or something of that nature. It's leading first forward with the concept of adding HP or EHP directly onto the suit, which really it's just a mess waiting to happen. I mean, you have all of the potential problems of breaking the medium frame balance between assaults and logis, which is already shaky. You have the potential problem of outstripping scouts to the point where they're no longer functionally viable. You have the potential to infringe on or overlap the commando role even more heavily. And it probably won't do all of those things at once, but the degree and type of application of extra EHP you apply can readily cause any of these problems. And so using it as the focal point or vanguard for how to try and make the role viable is really, I have a lot of trouble seeing how it's not just asking for more imbalance in the long run.
Well, I mean, it comes down to kind of how much they're going to be adding. If it's a small amount, if it's actually significant, we'll see. But I think as long as the logis are brought up with the same amount or similar amount, I think it'll be fine. It's just a matter of how much, and making sure that it's a change to the medium frames as a whole, not just the assault.
Yep, that's pretty much spot on as far as I can tell. The medium frames need to be kind of parallel in balance on a lot of things, and then have the specificity of their roles enhance something. So, provide that EHP or that survivability that they both need, but then make sure that the assault is the better slayer by making them better at slaying, not just better at standing in the fight, because that's already the Sentinel's role for one thing.
Right. I think the community is, for the most part, pretty well agreed upon that the assaults or maybe perhaps the medium frames as a whole need to be focused more around that HP regeneration, bonus to armor repairs, shield regulator, stuff like that. And so, like I said, we'll see how much HP they're giving them. I mean, the exact number is pretty important, but I think as long as that in the next pass we take a really good look at making sure we bring the Lachis up to a point where they can still remain balanced against the assault, and then probably doing quite a bit of a rework on the bonuses for both of them to make them a little more survivable and kind of push that regeneration theme, because I think that's really quite good for a medium frame, which is more mobile than a heavy, obviously. So they need to be able to get their HP back quickly once they get behind cover and whatnot. So I think the community is kind of banded together pretty well on that and taking a real good look at it. And I hope that we kind of push for that in Delta, barring the changes in Charlie don't totally break it.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. I think that it's a necessary change at some level for sure, just so long as it's not one that's being used to define a role, but rather is more of a groundwork or fundamental for the frame.
Yeah, I think jumping on bonuses and slot layouts all at once, as well as this sort of thing at the same time, would probably be pretty bad. So I'm glad to see that we're kind of easing into it. We'll see if this change is good or bad in the long run, but I think holding off on the bonuses and the slots till Delta or further is probably wise.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point for all, is that there has been a lot of feedback coming in, and there were a lot of good points made on different facets that were somewhat opposed to each other. So, my assessment, kind of being an outside observer, I think that it was probably a good move to drop back and punt, if you will, and kind of take a look at maybe picking off some of the easier to do things in Charlie, and maybe putting a more focused effort for suit balance for a later update. And who knows, maybe that might be one of the first projects that some of you guys in the room work on as part of the CPM. Because what strikes me is that it having an energized group of 6 or 7 folks helping sort through and or provide perspective for the feedback, or at least the level, and to be honest with you, the quality of feedback that Rattati's getting. I think that would probably be a welcome addition to the equation. So any other last thoughts on that one before we push on to the next objective? Okay. One of the things I did want to kind of put out to you guys, and this is always one that's kind of it's a little ugly to talk about sometimes, but it's really about the player base in Dust, and we've had a really good discussion about suit balance. And if you go on the forums right now, for all of you that they're listening to the podcast, there's a chance that you probably at some point have haunted the forums. There really is some really good feedback coming in from a lot of veteran players that have been around for a long time. There's a lot of quantity of feedback, that's coming in. And one of the things that struck me over the last week, and I've had this question asked of me in game and out, what is CCP's position? Like, what should they do, or how should they approach not just the sustainment of the Dust player base, but perhaps even trying to grow it or strengthen it as they continue to push forward with Legion? Since I think the theory is that they desire a large chunk of the Dust community to be the seed, sort of that initial seed of players that go over to Legion. And I'm kind of curious what your guys' thoughts are on what CCP should be working with the CPM on, or doing on their own to sustain the Dust community. And the honest question is also, should they do anything? So I'll open that one up to you.
Well, I'd go with retaining the uniqueness of Dust. I know Dust isn't completely unique, but it's got a lot of unique aspects, like your own assets and stuff like that. A lot of the next gen games that are coming out that are pulling players away. I'll mention Destiny and the future PlanetSide 2 on PS4. They'll bring some of the consoles over as well. They do a lot. They do stuff good, but they don't do anything groundbreaking or really new. Like I've played Destiny a couple of times the last few days and had fun playing it, but it's not really unique. It's a good play experience. It's a fun game to play. I won't say it's a bad game. It's well worth the money, but it's not unique, and that's what Dust needs to focus on, in keeping its uniqueness and its ability to sort of offer us something we haven't seen before, or we're not going to see from someone else, like from Bungie or from another game development company that do like to rehash the old things that make them look better, make them still play better, but still using the same formula that is tried and proven rather than trying to make their own.
I totally agree. I think that CCP is never really been able to compete at an even like they can't compete where their product is a direct competition. The reason that CCP has survived and has thrived as long as it has is because it offers something that nobody else does. And I think that the reason Dust has hung on despite all of its issues, and other games that have been popular and been talked about for, a week or a month or a couple months, is that really there isn't anyone offering exactly what Dust offers. It does, and it needs to keep pushing into areas that other games are not pushing into, rather than just trying to be, the next Battlefield.
See, that is going to cause issues, unfortunately. It is going to cause stumbling blocks because they are pioneering something new. It is a unique flavor to the game, which is what they should be focusing on. But it will cause issues. It will cause rage. It will cause nerdgasms. It will cause a whole lot of other things that can go up and down the whole ladder. You've got to be on it you got to be on the roller coaster though to get to the end. You have a look at Eve. That was a pioneer game 10 years ago or 13 years ago or whatever it is. Still is very much a pioneer game in its aspects of how much control it gives players. To a lot of people model newer survival games on Eve basics. Players being able to kill each other and whatnot and being able to do whatever they want and get away with it. A lot of the newer survival games have those aspects, but they don't have the depth of field that Eve Online does have. So in a lot of cases, Eve itself is still pioneering a lot of cases, so they need to keep that edge in Dust as in all their products.
Yeah, I think to kind of push that, they need to granted we can't add much more at this point because of the limitations of development, but there's aspects of Dust that are more unique than most, planetary conquest, the idea of faction warfare and trying to strengthen that. And again, there's limitations obviously, but I think working to improve those systems and improve and show how this makes it unique and how that's going to affect you as a player and what that's going to mean in the future. That's players have held on so long because of that potential of what it's going to become. And I think that even though we're limited now, we can still kind of realize that potential and make it more enjoyable for everyone and push the unique aspects that Dust has already, and then hopefully move that on towards Legion. So I think that if you give players what they've been waiting for as best you can, they're getting more inclined to actually stick around for what they really want, which is the final future vision that we had several years ago.
Well, we're going to have to understand that this is most likely, even in Legion, it's not going to be the final form either. That both Dust Legion and Evil the vision that Dust has set forth is going to continue to evolve as the gaming develops and players change and culture enrich the entire experience for everybody.
Yeah, the culture is huge. That's a big part of it. The community in Dust is toxic and terrible and awesome. I think we can all agree on that. And I think trying to push that community feel more, may that be with events or whatnot, I think that would do a great justice in terms of the game and making people feel like they're actually part of the universe rather than just playing a typical lobby shooter, because it's not a typical lobby shooter, but it will be if CCP lets it become that by just letting it stagnate. So I think, and I don't mean just throwing SP events at people. Those are great and all, but there's more you can do to make it interesting. The recent event had its issues obviously, but the thought process is good to try to push more unique ways to be part of the community, be part of the game, and be part of the universe. Because that's why we're all here, and I think you can still do that despite the limitations we have right now.
Okay. Well, and there's a lot of discussion that's going around, and that was the reason I wanted to bring it up to you guys, because again, a lot of you I think all of you, except for me and Derry, are running for CPM, and that's a common question, particularly when you talk to bitter vets. Is why are you sticking around when there's a good chance you're going to close down Dust and Legion? Technically isn't a go right. It's not greenlit right now. It's not a go right now, and that's a very common question that gets asked of a lot of people right now that I think are in your guys' position. And one, frankly, I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk about a little bit on the show. you know, the fact of the matter is CCP is very much on a kind of a do-over for Dust. They flushed a lot of assets. They did eat a bit of a loss when you look at their annual earnings report from last year, but they also doubled down on the idea behind Dust, and which really is taking shape in the form of Legion, and what they can salvage from Dust in terms of the player base and the lessons that they can learn in terms of perhaps in-game balance or mechanics or things like that. And that's really why I kind of wanted to tee it up for you guys, because there is a lot of negativity out there, which is very understandable. And that's kind of what I'm asking you guys is, there's a fairly small but a pretty hardcore base of folks that are floating around inside the Dust community, and the reality is there are still new people coming into the game that are only partially aware of what's going on with Dust and Legion, much less Eve or any of that other jazz. I run into them, every week. Some of which are, aware of the situation of the game, and some aren't. And that's kind of why I wanted to tee that up for you guys. Is like, what do you, I guess if you all put your flash forward hat on, like think through this. Like, what do you expect to have at the end of, let's say, a year? So when most of you are getting ready to hand the reins over to perhaps some next crop of CPM cats that'll be looking at something else, do you expect there to be Dust? Do you expect there to be Legion in beta? Well, I'm just curious, if you guys just had to spitball it right now in your head, where do you think you'll be sitting in a year?
I'm hoping to say that Dust will still be running in a year, and I think that hopefully Legion will be in beta at that point. I really don't think that a year from now we'll be ready to play a release grade Legion. But I'm hoping we'll be able to actually get in and see how it plays by then.
Yeah, I'd echo Zell there as well. That's pretty much spot on for where I'd like to see things. I don't think that we should be closing the curtain on Dust any more quickly than a year, and hopefully longer than that, honestly. And hopefully as well, Legion will be in a somewhat playable state, but I seriously doubt that a year is going to be enough time to properly release a live version of it.
Well, and that's the key thing for me, is that people will say, oh, Dust is dead, what's the point, why are we here? Well, the fact of the matter is that people are still playing. People are still enjoying the game. They're trying to enjoy the game as the best they can. So as a CPM, it's critical that you focus on understanding that people are playing this game, they want it to be good, so we need to make it better. I mean, as long as people are still playing, there's a purpose to doing what we're trying to do. And I mean, like I mirror, like I said this in another form, but win or not, there's a lot of talent and good ideas on the people on the ballot and in the community. And I hope that even if you don't make it in, you're still pushing to make the game better. I mean, that's why we're running for this. That's why we're doing this. And you can say Dust is dead all you want, but I still see people playing every day when I log in. So if they're still there, we got to work to make it better. And I think people forget that. And I think it needs to be a real key focus for CPM, is that people are here. They put a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of emotional effort into this game. They deserve to have continued support in the best possible capacity we can. So that's really key. And I don't want people to forget that, despite the negativity floating around.
Adding on to all the comments and sentiments given so far, I would also like to say that CPM will also have a responsibility in making sure that the cost that Legion has costed us in terms of community and goodwill and all the hoopla that came with it will be well worth the cost.
Yeah, and pushing for strong Dust support and keeping people happy and showing them that CCP is willing to put forth the effort to make a more balanced and enjoyable game. That's really key in showing, hey, we're not going to do the same shit we did with Dust and Legion. We're going to actually listen to you guys and really put forth what needs to happen to give you a good experience. And I think that the work done now for Dust is really critical in delivering that message to the players. And I think that we really need to focus on that.
What do you think, SirManBoy?
I'm agreeing with what a lot about everybody else is saying here. I still am super excited to play this game. I show up every week. I cap out every week, and it still feels fun to me. I still love playing with my friends over at Molon, and for me, it's a game that, like I said, I think it's going to eventually reach its potential, if not as Dust 514. It's going to be, what we all wanted it to be in Legion. Something that I think would do a lot to keep the excitement high in the community is, while we are all still playing Dust, and I hope that we are, for another year while they continue to work on this Legion project, it would be nice for them to, and I know they don't want to overpromise anything. I know that's been one of their big mistakes in the past, but it would be nice for them to finally publicly recognize some of these bigger features that we want and say, you know what, guys, we're telling you for a fact, we're working on this. It's in our crosshairs, these player market sort of ideas, the team deploy idea, the things that are going to get people really excited to play Legion. I think these are the things that the devs need to make an effort, about talking about sometimes in interviews and in dev posts, and say, guys, we know you want this. And, we're working on it, and we value the fact that you want this, and we're going to bring it to you at some point, and you're going to get it in Legion. So again, not to overpromise, not to, make it so they can't deliver, but these are things that have to be there for Legion to be a success. I mean, clearly these are all things we've wanted in Dust. And if there is going to be a Legion, you do eventually have to finally, produce the goods. So I would like to see CCP come out on the record from time to time and say, while we're developing this game, we want to let you know that these are some big picture items that we know you want, and we're going to bring them to you. So I think that would be cool.
Even just mentioning that they're working on them would be enough. It's just not a matter of, they don't need to say, oh, we are bringing them to it. It's, hey, we are working on bringing this to you. We're trying our best to bring this particular feature to you. This is what we're doing, rather than, oh yeah, we're sort of working on stuff. That's what we're getting at the moment. We're working on stuff. We're working on Legion. It's all. I'm sure there are people who have much insight into it. I'm sure there's one in this particular conversation who has insight into it who can't share. But behind closed doors, there's a lot of stuff that we want to know that at least they're working on something. We don't need to know the particulars. We just need to know, hey, they are working on this particular thing. They're working on this player market or this team deploy or this thing. Even if we don't know, even if we don't know if they're going to get it out or not, they just need to say we are working on this stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty fair point.
I'll go fish on a record. As far as Legion goes, there's not much more you guys know about than I do. CCP has been very transparent of what they've been working on so far. There is maybe one or two features you may not have heard yet, but that's because they're in a state not to be shared at this time, because they're really focused on fixing, just getting the concrete and foundation hardened, so to say.
No, and I think that's fair. And one of the things I would kind of offer, again, as a dude that's interested in the CPM, literally speaking for a player base that is either, the remains of a player base or what we want the player base to be in the future, would be, I think, pressing them on a little bit of discussion about Legion is probably not a bad thing. And let me frame this. And I'm not really referring to Star Citizen, by the way, which, is kind of got its own somewhat interesting model, but that's one of the things you see, like if Dust had never existed and they just announced Legion, the lead up to Dust or the lead up to a lot of these other games where they're trying to do some innovative things, you see some pretty engaged devs, and there's a lot of games out there right now that are in the stage that are in that kind of 12 to 18 months before you get a beta stage, kind of about the same timeline we're talking about for Legion, I think. And there's some very frank and open discussions going on about those. I think because of the baggage that CCP has with how things have gone for them with Dust, and a variety of other things, not the least of which is some of the things that they've had going on in CCP at the corporate level. I think we're a little bit more in the dark than other, sort of nascent player communities that are floating around out there. And at some point that really does honestly need to change, particularly if you want to continue to engender, some support from folks. Let me ask you guys this. If CCP were to just basically kind of come out and very sort of directly acknowledge that, Dust is not a standalone, but we really want to harvest as many good ideas and balance points and things like that to put into Legion, almost, not necessarily a beta, but literally like a, sort of like an in-game test run kind of thing, and particularly to the players that have been here, for a long time. Would that help at all? I mean, because they kind of went sideways a little bit, I think, when they kept saying that Dust was its own thing, Legion was separate, and there's some DNA that they share, and don't worry, Dust is going to be around. I think we all really understand what's happening is that if let's say 6 months from now, everything that Rattati's been working on looks like it's working swimmingly, my gut tells me that a large chunk of that shit's going to be in Legion as is, at least in terms of values in a spreadsheet kind of stuff. What are you guys' thoughts on that?
I'm actually all for it. Now, I'm all in for that because at the very least, if they're going to use Dust 514 as a test bed, they're going to give us the assets to test, in my opinion. They have to. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a proper test bed. You wouldn't be able to get the balance fight in Dust if you don't have all the assets you're going to have in Legion, which means, at the very least, for combat effectiveness, and this is one thing I do want to push for, Dust 514 would have to be relatively equal, if not in graphical content and MMO content, in actual shooting in your face content to what Legion would be. So in order to be a proper test bed, we'd have to have that equality between the two. So I'm all for it.
They need to be really careful because they don't want to give the impression that Legion is just Dust version 2, because it really needs to be more than just, a sequel.
But it really is, and I think everybody sees past that.
Everyone says it is.
No, but what I'm saying is that we just don't want a rehash of Dust on
You don't want
PC.
it to be a port, is what you're saying.
Right.
You want it to be literally a 2.0, not a port, is I think what you're saying.
Yeah, so if you want to take the lobby shooter, the combat balance, the mechanics, or most of the mechanics, and move them to Legion, that's fine. But they need to hammer out and show people that's just part of Legion. There's more to it than that. There's more than just going into a match, shooting people, and coming out, because people want more than that. Just the standard lobby shooter is not what people envisioned initially.
I completely agree there because, as I said, all I want parity for is the actual combat. The actual combat systems, the balance between tanks and all the racial variants of the tanks. Aside from anything that requires a huge amount of development time, like MTACs and stuff like that, any asset they want to put into Legion would have to be put into Dust combat. Only the combat. I'm not talking the MMO aspects. I'm not talking the PvE, salvage, all the rest of the aspects. I'm talking the raw PvP, shoot each other in the face gameplay to be equal. And if that's the only thing they pull out of Dust and put into Legion, and they test better than Dust, they make it really good in Dust, or at least better than average. And then they pull that out and put it into the rest of Legion, I'd be happy with that.
Yeah, I think that's fine. They just need to make sure that that's the perception, that it's only a small part of what Legion will be. If they can hammer that perception in, then I think it's fine. But I really caution them in saying something like that and not really hammering out to the players that this is not just Dust version 2. There's more to it, but we're using Dust as a beta for the combat of Legion. I think that would be good, but they need to be careful.
Well, the selling point there would be that if they can use the combat mechanics from Dust, then they can then they can focus their new development efforts with the Legion team on the actual MMO parts,
all the other stuff
that they should be working on.
Yes, absolutely.
That's actually a great point, and this does circle back to a little bit of that transparency discussion on Legion. And honestly, I'm hoping that we hear something, maybe not earth-shaking, but we hear a pretty solid update coming out of Eve Vegas. Who knows? But I think I think you're making a pretty good point there, and that's why I kind of wanted to tee it up.
Eve Vegas is the wonderful event that brought us the laser-focused comment. So I am certainly expecting a truly interesting response from Eve Vegas.
Yeah, to note that comment was made at FanFest as well, a couple I think 2 years in a row as well. So.
Yeah, I don't think you're ever going to hear him say that. Although I did see several posts in the forums about the whoever wins the laser rifle thing. There was a strong push to get him to refer to as the laser focused laser rifle. Yeah, I thought that was genius. By the way, the Atlee. This is all a pretty good discussion, and it's one of those where you can really walk the edge of being really negative about some stuff, or really trying to figure out how do you be constructive at this point, because I think that's what I've noticed, and what is one of the things that makes me take a break from Dust or the forums or Skype and stuff like that is when you see like these sort of sine waves of negativity that come up and down, and it's all very understandable, particularly from people that have been around for so long. But it's also a little bit aggravating. It's like, hey, I got it, but so, is there anything more constructive than posting hate or, throwing out a lot of negative vibes on the radio, over comms or something like that. And I'm certainly not a cheerleader by any stretch of the imagination. I can kind of go down a litany of things that I beef with CCP about on the Eve side or the Dust side. I kind of approach it from, you don't need, I've said this before to people, cheerleaders and doomsayers equally annoy me. And what I really look for is something that's in the middle, something that's really like constructive. Like one of the things that we had talked about that sparked a big wave of negativity actually, like in the middle of the week was there's a lot of discussion. Kane Sparrow announced that, I don't know if there's an announcement, but he just made a lot of comments that there's 0 EveLink in Legion when it arrives. Now, one, I don't know that he knows that or not for a fact, because it sounds like things are very much set in mud with Legion. But if that's the intention right now, I do personally think that'd be a big mistake, because that's really one of the things that sets the kind of the mercs on the ground part of the New Eden IP apart, is that there's a link between games. Perhaps it's something baked in that they want to add later. I don't know, but it is something that's kind of interesting. And again, it's one of those things that garnered a lot of discussion back and forth. And again, to qualify it, Kane's a current CPM0 member. And he kind of categorically said that there wasn't going to be an EveLink in Legion. My statement back to that is that may be the case right now, but I certainly don't know what the case is going to be 6 months from now. And I will agree that if it's not there, that would be probably a pretty serious mistake on at least not having the level of EveLink we have now. Would I think be a fairly, not catastrophic, but a serious setback at the launch. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I totally. This was one I really picked up on it quickly when it was mentioned, because and the thing is, I do think that this is something that can definitely stand a change between now and them releasing the game, and I really sincerely hope it does. I think the biggest mistake of Dust 514 was not enough EveLink and not doing enough of it fast enough. I think they were too slow and too cautious about integrating with their successful game and their strong player base. As I'm a member of the CFC in EVE Online, and the big thing for me was there's 30,000 players or something affiliated with the CFC, or at least 30,000 characters. There's a lot of alts, but the thing was they don't care about anything pertaining to Dust. You want orbitals? They don't care. Why would they care? Because it doesn't affect their game. It doesn't affect their region of the game. There's nothing they profit from doing it, so they don't care. So the thing is they're looking at introducing this new game. They're putting it on PC, which very likely is meant at least partially because it will appeal to their EVE player base, their huge community they already have that said we want a PC game. But they're still going to get a game potentially that doesn't affect their other game, that doesn't affect EVE. And I think if they do that, they're going to get a lot of the same response, which is going to be players saying, well, this doesn't affect my EVE empire, so why should I care?
No,
and I'm very concerned
say
about that.
I'd say it doesn't affect it yet. Okay, just because they haven't got it in now doesn't mean they won't have it in later. I would much prefer, and I've always been for this, as me and you have hit loggerheads over this particular issue, in fact, several times, that I want Legion to be a very stable core game. I want it to be a good game. I'm not expecting Battlefield or next gen FPS greatness. Destiny, PlanetSide 2, whatever. I'm not expecting that level of greatness, but I want it to be a very solid core game that has its own unique aspects, so people want to play it as much as they want to play something else. So that way, you'll have a player base that is Legion devoted. You'll have a player base that is EVE devoted, and you'll then, when you do link them up and you've got two good quality games on both sides, the link itself can be an all or nothing link. You don't need to introduce it gradually. You can say, okay, this is what Legion's going to happen, this is what Legion's going to affect, and you can do it all in one big sweep, compared to little bit of injection, a little
I
bit
don't
of
think you're
injection.
going to get. I think Jackal. I'm with you, but I've got to tell you, I deal with the East Side guys at a fairly significant level. I don't think I don't think they're gonna want the transition to be like that. They certainly didn't want it for Dust. I hear what you're saying. I think there's a lot of merit to it. I think the Eve side folks would tell you that they do want incremental injection.
And
Well, even if you had incremental, you'd be able to plan it out a lot better. So you'd be able to say, okay, stage 1 is this, stage 2 is this, stage 3 is this. Whereas at the moment, we have this little trickle of a link that doesn't really do anything. It doesn't affect the Eve universe much at all. It's got a tiny amount of it's got an effect in faction warfare. It's not small in faction warfare, but it's not really worthwhile for Eve players to invest in all the time. You've got it affecting a section of low sec that was and still is relatively dead by comparison to the rest of other low sec regions. Sort of it's a testing ground sort of thing. It doesn't really affect anything now. So if you bring Legion in and it affects nothing, what's really going to change from an Eve player's point of view?
Nothing changes except
So at the outset, there's no difference, but they can still introduce that link incrementally as they come once they've got a solid game in Legion. I'd rather have Legion being a solid, good game before it's linked to Eve and possibly screwing itself over at the cost of that. Because in my opinion, a lot of that was why Dust failed, because it didn't have the link that it was supposed to have. Whereas if you come out to Legion and say, hey, this doesn't have a link, but we are working on it and we are going to make it a good link at the end.
But that's what they said for Dust, and I tried driving interest on the concept of, don't worry, the link is coming. We start now, the link will come, and what does it turn out? It turns out I'm telling people, oh wait, no, this game's not going to have that link ever.
But the link will come. It's just you got to give it time. You got to make sure the games are solid. If Dust isn't solid, the link's going to be sour. The link is going to be bad. If Legion is bad, the link will not be good, no matter how much you make it effective.
But here's the thing that my main frustration came from Dust is that early on in Dust development, I was asking, so how is this going to link to Eve? And they could never really give me a solid answer because I don't think they really knew at that time. I don't think they ever had a clear, concise plan. This is how we're going to link it up. This is how it's going to work. This is how it's going to affect Eve and how it's going to affect Dust. And it's that lack of a plan, which I think kind of led to these, well, I guess I'd say duct tape fixes, where we just kind of slap it onto the side and tape it on there and glue it on, and okay, yeah, it kind of works, sort of. And that's really what kind of killed the link that we have now. And I think that, if anything, they need to focus on having exactly how they're going to do it ahead of time, implementation or not. They need to know what they're doing and not just, oh, well, we'll figure it out later. Because, I mean, like you said, they go, oh, well, it'll come eventually, but they didn't know how they were going to do it. And by then they'd gotten to a point where it didn't work. What they wanted to do wasn't going to work, and thus we're in the issue we have now.
I would like to throw this out, and this is, maybe for if anybody else in the room is kind of floating on where Jackal is. They now have a ton of actual real-time feedback from both the Dust side and the Eve side on how they want the link to work, to what extent they want it to work, how deep it should affect back and forth. I mean, if you'll remember, that was actually, I think, probably 5 or 6 pretty relevant questions that they were asking CSM candidates on the vote match this last go round. So I think that there's a lot of information out there, and I would offer this, just like what we're saying, that, hey, we could use a lot of the things coming out of Dust as kind of a roadmap, or at least it's broken some trail for Legion to follow and then push on further once they're ready. My personal opinion on this, and it comes from literally just being a player, I think that you need to have a better iteration of what you have now across the board to include an Eve link. Now, it could be something as simple as the orbital dropping for LP, which, if you're in faction warfare, you're right, that's not small. It's not significant, but but that's pretty legit, particularly for the individual pilot. I think that you need to at least have the sort of the blueprint laid out, or at least, like you said, sort of the iterative steps laid out, but at least come to the table at launch with something. Because I think I think we all remember that that's actually one of the things that garnered a lot of buzz about Dust, And frankly, one of the few very positive things that was said about the game for the first year it was out, which was, it was that CCP was truly trying to create something or do something that was innovative or cutting edge. And even in the most minor way, they did accomplish that component of what they set out to do. And that's something I think would be honestly a shame, is that if they backslide on something that even their harshest critics would say, you know what, it was small, but you did something that nobody else did. And that's one of the things I just kind of put out there, is I would not want too much of a regression in that you didn't even bring it to the table. Now, I do like your idea, Jackal, very clearly about trying to have a very solid roadmap of all the things that they want to do. And I think this is where like the CSM and CPM should be having a lot of discussions at some point. Once they get into that mode with the dev team, is, hey, what is the roadmap of how we want these things to affect? Is it small potatoes stuff like we're doing with orbitals and faction warfare? Is it something more specific where if you control large chunks of a system, you can set gate taxes, on the Eve side? Is it I can take over a planet or a district and start affecting PI, that kind of thing? So there's a lot of things that we could do, but again, this is just an example of one of those things I think all you guys, or at least hopefully a lot of you guys, are going to need to work out. And again, my thought on this is, even though it may not be planned now, and I do think we all need to have the game delivered in a high quality form, nobody has any illusions that one of the things that would truly set Dust apart from everybody else is the ability to link to Eve. So I think everybody is on the right track. I think it's, again, how do you get to the finish line?
Well, the thing that we discussed this earlier actually, was that I think that CCP needs to focus on where they can be unique from other games, and I think that that's the Eve link. I don't think that Legion will be a top shelf shooter out of the gate as a first person shooter alone, or as a just an MMO. It needs to be a first person shooter MMO in this universe, very deeply set in this universe. I think that that's one of the most important elements, and it's very painful to me personally, as someone who really wants Legion to succeed, really wants to see Dust keep going, to hear that they may be backing off on the link as a launch feature. I think it's the most important feature on their entire feature list. I think that over everything else that they've talked about in Legion, if this is the top feature, and I really hope that that if they are indeed not planning on having it at launch, that they revise those thoughts before it gets to that point.
I'm going to step in and just counterpoint this again, as usual. I'm just going to point out that if they come to the table with a plan for an Eve link, it's great. That's awesome. I just don't want it on the table. I just don't want it in the game at the beginning. I want the game to be solid, and there are many ways you can immerse in the New Eden universe without the Eve link. You've got your racial specializations, you've got your vehicles, you've got your weapons. All that stuff is racially tied. You can tie it racially. You can do all this stuff to immerse them in the universe without the Eve link. And it's not the most. It may be a central point, but there can be many central points to a unique experience.
Hey, I just wanted to clarify. Like when you said you don't want it to be at the launch, I think what you please tell me if I'm right.
In the game is what I said.
No,
in the game. Let me in the game
at all. It's like, so what if they think that the gameplay is actually pretty good before they launch?
Oh, if they can get the gameplay good at launch and have the slight Eve link, that's fine. But as long as the gameplay comes first, that's the main thing I want. I want the Legion to play well.
Well, okay. I don't think that. I think that it's going to be very hard to get non-Eve players, non-Dust players to the table without something unique like that, something on that level, and I think that they're gonna have a very hard time getting Eve players to accept it and want to invest in it and get involved in it if it's separate.
But they just need something that's unique to Legion, not unique to New Eden.
I'll be honest with Jackal. I'm with you all the way up to about that last point where knowing the Eve community kind of the way I do is, I think you're going to have I think the built-in player base for Legion at start, not the optimal and not what we want it to be, but at start, it's the lion's share of it's going to probably come from either Dust players or Eve players. So I think that's the one thing that we can now say we've actually found a good discussion topic for next week's show, perhaps, is how do we, when you look at Legion, how do you build the player base in the future? How do you start with the Eve or start with the Dust or start with the folks that don't know anything about either? And I think that this is probably a good segue point where we start kind of wrapping it up and going into shout-outs. But I do legitimately think that what we've all touched on is a lot of the concerns going on out in the community now about a lot of different things, mostly from the vet side of the community, because you get a very different take when you talk to the new guys. And I think that Soraya and Jackal, going back and forth there for a minute, you've really solidified on one of those interesting sort of long-range effect discussions that the CPM1 really could have an impact on how things work for Legion. Because let's be real, we're a long way off from seeing anything in game and all that other kind of good stuff. But what you're really going to see are those discussions back and forth about direction. I think it's very clear that CCP Shanghai has vision now, and they have focus, which is, and again, somebody stop me if I'm wrong, I think we would all say that was something that was lacking for a long time in Dust and probably hurt the game badly. So I think this is going to be one of these sort of very critical discussion points that CPM1 will work with in the future. And I'm not joking. I think we could spend a ton of time on this maybe next week, maybe even talking about the wrap up of the CPM elections, hopefully. So I would like to table this unless anybody's got any parting shots, and I'll open it up to the floor if anybody's got last points, and then we'll move on to shout-outs. Cross, go ahead.
I've got a couple quick ones. One thing that Legion has and hopefully will really make use of that Dust hasn't had for a lot of technical and logistical reasons is a test server. And that's going to be huge as far as the potential value of balancing and iterating on features, etc. So there's a lot of buffer available to the devs, especially in a beta state, that hopefully will be employed. Secondarily, just from a pseudo outside perspective, as far as attracting new people to the community, what you need is uniqueness. You need something that makes the person take a second look at the game instead of just go, oh, there's something else out there. And having the Eve Dust link in whatever form, having it be something that isn't on the table with any of the other games, that you can legitimately put that bullet point in there for live launch and say, this is a unique aspect, will make people curious. That's how you get people into the game that wouldn't otherwise bother to get involved or try it out. Now, what specific form that takes, that's got to be tested, that's got to be iterated, and obviously if the core of the game itself isn't stable, it shouldn't be in live launch regardless. We shouldn't push a game out the door when it's not ready to be played yet. And that's, the core mechanics Jackal's talking about. But I would say that should be a given at live launch regardless, which also means that, to me at least, the unique element of the Eve Dust link at some level should also be a given at live release, because whether or not the core features are there shouldn't even be a question. So just kind of my 2 cents before we sign off.
It shouldn't be a question, but unfortunately with Dust, it was a question.
Well, and that gets into Sony and mixing platforms and a whole bunch of other stuff that's technical in both the legal sense and mechanical.
I can't accept blaming Sony for what was missing from Dust.
Sony's not to blame for the link.
You can blame Sony. You can blame Sony for the pace, if anything. That's all. That's all you can really blame them for, is the pacing, because their what do you call it? Approval processes.
Everyone back the train up here. There was not a question of blame or laying responsibility. It was a question of complexity. The statement was very specifically that with cross-platform and with all of the logistics that are involved in that it caused a lot of additional stressors and a lot of additional problems when getting the game out in a timely manner that matched with marketing. It's not about holding somebody specifically responsible. It's about acknowledging the simple reality that in that environment, especially without a test server, which is another part of that environment, you have a lot more difficulty iterating on these things in an effective and timely manner. And that's just simply the facts of the matter. It's not about blame at all.
I mean, not many people remember, but back in the beta, there was a lot of stress over trying to get the link to work in the first place, and that ate up quite a bit of the beta development. And not to blame the link being one of the things for it, but you did see the results of it. The core gameplay did suffer because they were too focused on the link.
And that's what my philosophy is, trying to avoid the fact that the gameplay should prioritize first, then the link come afterwards once everything's set in place, rather than trying to focus on too much at once.
The game itself should accommodate for Link, but it should not be a focus until core's done. Once core's done, then we can focus on Link.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Hey, I would. So I'll close it out with this, since just let me throw this out at you, Jacqueline. And I really want to actually tee this up for next week, so we can kind of do a deep dive on it. What Iron Wolf said, and for anybody who knows, like, I poke fun at Iron Wolf a lot because I struggle with sometimes following in text. He's much clearer when you talk to him one-on-one. But I think what he said is spot on. It's you have to have it baked in. Like, you have to have the guts of it, or the idea of it, accounted for in Legion, whether or not it's visible when it steps foot off at launch. So with that, we're going to move into shout outs, and we'll kind of go in reverse order, or actually we'll go in the same order since we're all talking. We'll lead off with Cross and go right down the label here on the Mumble chat, and we'll close it out for the night. So Cross, any shout outs?
Well, shout out to the community in general, you group of crazy bitter vets and noobs who have stumbled into this nest of vipers that you probably weren't expecting. I'm glad you're all sticking around and actually trying to make something of this game, which could be so much more interesting than, frankly, a lot of the stuff that may be shinier out there. And specifically to our tech guy, Derry, here, for getting me a legitimate headset and helping get that set up. It's deeply appreciated, and wanted to make sure that he got his due feather in the cap for that.
All right, cool. Soraya?
Yeah, I'm going to give a shout out to my guys in Top Men. I'm going to give a shout out to specifically Darth Carbonite, who tried really hard this month to pull off the Scrambler Rifle thing. I think he probably came in second place this month, unfortunately. But yeah, to everybody who gave a really good effort on that event, it'll be really interesting to see just who pulled out victories on that.
Cool. Iron Wolf?
I'd like to give a shout out to all the CP1 candidates for trying to get into this crazy madhouse of a council. Also like to give a shout out to Catmark for keeping me entertained throughout the week and keeping my sanity in check.
Yeah, I saw some of the trolling going on back and forth. That shit was pretty good. Okay, Derry?
Well, first, of course, my court mates and Legion guys, not Legion guys. God, I'm tired. What's it called now when you're in an alliance? Alliance guys, yes. Oh God, Alliance guys. For all the gameplay, all the good memories. Shout out to all the CPM members, CPM1 candidates, excuse me, for running in and put your head on. I know it's been a tough season, and props to you for trying to get into this crazy thing we call CPM. And shout out to everybody here on the stream today. Thanks for making me staying up somewhat interesting.
Okay, and for the record, Derry is not diabetic. And his blood sugar's not off. He's actually just tired. So, Pokey?
Shout out to my corp, OSG Planetary Operations, and shout out to everyone who's running for CPM 1. You guys have had it's been a real trip working with you just these past few months, just talking and whatnot, and thanks to everyone who's been voting. It's good that you get your voice out there, and special thanks to the people I've been having a lot of discussions with on the forums lately on balance and concept and conceptual ideas and whatnot. I've been extremely impressed with some of the ideas you guys have been putting out the last couple of months. It's been really awesome. I love that stuff. That's why I do this. So it's been awesome talking to you. So thanks.
Okay, and SirManBoy?
Yeah, shout outs as always to my Mola and Labe crew. Special shout out to my CEO, Hawk and Pete. I'd also like to throw some shout outs to support Logis. Keep doing what you're doing out there, guys. We need some more nano hives on the field. I know that. But otherwise, keep doing what you're doing. I'd also like to give a shout out to the voters for the CP M1 race. And also a special shout out to those of you who did throw some support my way on the vote. Thank you so much. I graciously and sincerely appreciate that. And shout out to everybody here tonight. I know it's not a very far and loud shout out since you guys are all here on the mics with me, but it's great to have people jump on a podcast every week and talk about this great game and, play a small part in keeping the excitement in this community. So I think it's wonderful that we have things like this. And so thanks to all of you. I want to give you guys a shout out for your hard work and dedication. So there you go.
Yep, absolutely. Black Jackal.
And my shout outs go as usual to first and foremost to my son, who has been bugging me this entire time. He's a reality check. I'll give him that. I'll make sure. To my corp, Southern Legion, you guys have been behind me the whole way. You guys and the Greater Alliance and Final Resolution all been behind me. The other candidates, you guys have been. It's been a ride. I'll say that it's definitely been a ride, up and down, left, right, whatever center. It's almost over for the moment, for the at least for the first time we're doing it. We're almost there. We see the light at the end of the tunnel. And to everyone else in the community, you guys are the guys who've hung on, even the bit of vets who come back and complain about it. You guys are still here. You're still making me laugh and smile. You're still making me rage. You're still making me have orgasms. You're still making me just want to be here, want to be a representative of you guys. So kudos on that.
All right. And guys, this is Jason Larison, and shout outs to all the folks that came on tonight. So particularly for Cross and SirManBoy, really appreciate it. Jackal, you're becoming somewhat of a regular, along with Wolf Saber. And again, shout out to everybody in the community that has been giving a lot of feedback to the dev team in reference to Dust and Legion. And for all you guys trying out other games and Destiny and this, that, and the other, awesome. Go have a great time. Seriously, and bring those ideas back about what you want to see in Legion and put those in the forums. Talk to us about them. And and when you get the chance, pitch it to the devs and the CPM if you see something in another game. I think it's a good thing when you go out and play other things. But always remember, your crew's always going to be here in Dust, and we're always going to welcome you back, and we're always going to want to get in match with you and shoot you in the face or get shot by you. So I really appreciate that. And I do want to give a quick mention out to CCP Rattati in particular. And I don't do this very, very often. I mean, I know we always say that we appreciate the work he does, but the amount of engagement he's had over the last few days has been really, really, pretty high. And I've also noticed a lot of people in the forums that, kind of take the piss out of him, which is, a great British phrase for poking at guys, because they're not getting their information from him on a weekend or on a holiday or this, that, and the other. The only thing I'd have to say to everybody on that is, my shout out is to CCP Rattati for putting up with us sometimes. And we all want information and we all want to play it, but it's a hobby to us at best. But it's his job, and we do have to respect that. And I would kind of offer that as just a constructive piece of commentary to the community writ large. And by and large, you guys are awesome, even when you're poking each other with sharp sticks in the eye. But you're still awesome. And I play a game with you guys anywhere, any game you name it: Dust, Legion, Eve, Destiny, Battlefield. I don't care. I'd play with just about anybody I've met here on the Dust community. So with that, we're going to call episode 12 to a close, and we'll see you guys next week. Thanks. 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 Guys next week.